into the fourth dimension.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Triumph Over Lockdown, episode 9. Wow, this is amazing. So welcome to all those who are watching from wherever you're watching from, whatever platform you're coming in from. Please mention in the comments where you're tuning in from and what platform. It will be wonderful to interact with you. We have a bumper show today, something quite special. Actually, we're going to be talking about the self. Sometimes that can be a little bit of woo-woo stuff coming in, but I promise you this won't be woo-woo. This will be really good quality stuff about all sorts of things about ourselves. I mean, how many selves do we have? You know, most people say, well, what are you talking about? It's just me, right? That's all it is. And so let's question that today. Let's understand there are different aspects of the self and how we actually define the self and how it actually influences our behavior and our state of well-being. It's really important that we do that. Coming up at the break time, we have some great information coming up. Hopefully I can get it to you. It's about hormones and how that affects us. So if you've got issues with insulin or menopause or any other kind of hormonal issues, then that will be coming up at the break time. And then again, after the break, we'll be having a bit more discussion. But first of all, we're going to go into our usual breathing exercise and a little bit of meditation about what the self is. And let's get started. Okay then, so as we know, we start off with the breathing. We're going to go 4 rounds of vagal breathing, which is really going to put us into that safe system, that system of calming the nervous system, getting us into social safety mode. So breathe with me, using our tummies, deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. So breathing in. Hold it. And breathing out through the mouth, slowly. Let go. Breathing in. Filling those lungs, hold it. And out through the mouth, as if you're blowing out a candle. Wonderful. Breathing in. Hold it. And breathing out slowly. Let's do one more. Hold it. And breathing out. Wonderful. So many of us look at ourselves with different identities. Sometimes we have a bit of a playful self going on. Sometimes we're a bit of a childish self. Sometimes we've got a real serious professional self, don't we? Anyone here identifying with any of that? But sometimes we can have things like the victim self or the patient self. Sometimes in even certain situations, people that have survived certain incidents, you might have this notion of a survivor self. You know, I'm a survivor of a car crash, or I'm a survivor of a disease, or I'm a survivor of an attack of some sort. And we incorporate that into ourselves. We also have other domains that we have a kind of a self. So we might have a parent self, or a friend self, or I'm a helping type of self. Sometimes in certain different terminologies, it might be even a rescuer self. And I begin to identify with these selves. And a lot of the time, we can actually lock on to one or more of these selves. And it can be sometimes very helpful, but it can also be sometimes quite problematic and cause us, unending amounts of suffering if we are locked into that self. And then we feel kind of anxious about leaving that self. A rescuer type self has extreme anxiety when they come across a situation and have that urge and drive to do the rescuing, and have extreme anxiety about letting that go and maybe not rescuing at that time. Likewise, a professional self, if we get too fused with it, if we get too attached to it in such a way where we cannot detach ourselves from that professional self, then when we're not in a professional environment, we might find it very anxiety producing to detach yourself from being that professional self, whoever that is. So maybe you're a doctor, and during, especially during these times, a doctor is working extra time and round the clock and under a lot of pressure, and they get totally fused with being a doctor. So much so that they might even find it difficult to take off some free time, because doctors don't do that. They might have problems even taking breaks during the day, because how can a doctor take a break? It might even be a situation where they have terrible guilt during their days off, because they have end of shift, they go home, might have even been a double shift, they got home, and now they're supposed to rest, but because they're fused with that self of being a doctor, it can be a situation where, what else am I doing? I should be back in the surgery, I should be back in the hospital, etc. But it could be the same for any profession, that we get stuck into that profession, and it's very difficult to come out of that personality, even come out of that mask, come out of that sense of self that's identified with your profession. I know that myself in the past was totally identified with my profession, and so even when I went home, my head was always in the job. My personality, the way I acted, the way you can't do this because that kind of profession doesn't do that. You can't go to the shops and can't carry your bags through the market because people will look at me, and so on and so forth. And it can be really held to an extreme. Also from the point of view of that self that we connect to as content, even in daily life as a parent, for instance. And we take on board all the content of what a parent is, a parent's responsibility. A parent needs to do this, a parent needs to tend, to take care of, to be worried about, so on. Everything that has to do with a parent. But then when we move out of that parental kind of role, and we might go into a more intimate partner role, or a role as a friend, or a role as being at work, or whatever, that parental role is very difficult for us to detach with, even for that small amount of time. Of course, it doesn't stop us being a parent. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that sense of identity where even with our friends, we're still talking about our children, we're still talking, everything's about friends. Maybe with our intimate partner, we're not managing to detach ourselves from the fact that we are parents. And that can sometimes be very unuseful and very unhealthy in the way that we behave and respond to different things in our life. So I thought that maybe we could do a little exercise together to help us kind of take a different perspective on the different types of selves that we have. So if you want to just get your feet on the ground and just kind of get a relaxed position, good posture. Take a deep breath in, let it go. You can gaze on the floor for this, or you can even close your eyes like that, just relax and get into a kind of an imaginative mode. And how we perceive ourselves in different ways of conceptualizing a story that goes with who we are. And I'd like you to think of the different types of selves that you identify with. Some of these selves might be quite painful. I am the type of person that's always in pain. I am a worrying person. You might define yourself by these things. Oh, I'm a worrier. I wear my heart on my sleeve. When identifying with that, these kind of expressions, oh, I've always done that, fill in the space, whatever that is. So if you just lower your eyes or close your eyes, get into a kind of self, just identify one or two of these different selves. Let's say a self that's a little bit more painful, more uncomfortable, that kind of self, and a self that's much more joyful and playful. So let's take, for instance, I want you to kind of look at these selves and see, what does that self look like? Right? Pick one of the selves and, how does that self dress? What clothes do you pick that go hand in hand with that self that you want to portray? What kind of hairstyle do you wear with that? What posture do you take when you're in that self? It might be the suffering self where you're always kind of crouched down, almost in the fetal position, always bent over, always looking sad. Or maybe you're in that kind of professional leadership role self where you're always upright, back straight, serious look on your face, smart, professional, power clothing. Just kind of sense what kind of outwardly looking person you are when you're in that self. And now I want you to kind of think, how does that self think? Are they always critical of others? Maybe that self of yours thinks very critically about yourself. Oh, I should have done this, could have done this, would have done that, if I'd done this, the thing. Just let that come up. What do you think when you're in that type of self mode. I'd like you to kind of notice what it feels like when you're in that, whatever self you've picked for this exercise, that suffering self, that painful self, that worryful self. Just sit there a minute with that. Breathe in and out. And as you think about the different senses of self that you've just noticed, I want you to picture these in your mind's eye. Let's take an image of your best self. Try to get that image up of what your best self would look like. What does your best self look like? See this self in front of you. Use your imagination to see a picture of your best self. And just notice your emotional response to this sense of best self. How do you respond to that? What emotions show up when you see in front of you your best self? What are your thoughts about this best self of you? What kind of things do you think about when you see your best self? Take a deep breath in and out. What would it mean to you if you could no longer hold this sense of self? If you had to let it go? What I would like you to do is to see if you can hold this sense of self lightly. Imagine you have a little butterfly in your hand. You wouldn't want to crush it. You would just want to kind of hold it lightly in your hand. That's the way I'd like you to relate to that sense of self, even that sense of best self. You know, if the butterfly wanted to fly off, you would just let it go. So just imagine that that sense of self of yours just flies off. And just say to yourself, I let go of you. Notice if you're clinging on to any sense of this self. Sometimes this can be very difficult, and just let that go too. And as you do this, I also want you to notice that there's a you there, hearing all this in this moment. There's a you still there that's always been there. Now I'd like you to gently shift your attention to that painful self, that struggling self of yours. Just see that person in front of you. that image of you as the suffering, painful, worryful, anxious, depressed self, whatever it is for you. Notice your emotional reaction to this sense of self. How are you responding? What's showing up when you observe this self of you? What thoughts show up about this self-image? What would it mean to you if you could no longer hold on to this sense of self? Just like that butterfly. If you had to let it go. This sense of suffering self, victim self, survivor self, anxious self, painful self. See if you can just hold that lightly, just like you would a butterfly. And imagine that this sense of self just flies off slowly. And as you do, you say to yourself, I let go of you. And notice if there's anything clinging behind of this sense of worryful, painful, suffering self. And if you can notice that, let that go too. Just let it go. And as you do let that go, also notice that there's still a you there. Hearing me say this in this moment, there's still a you that's always been there. A you that's looking out from behind your eyes. A you that's not connected to that content in your life. A you that experiences different events and experiences in your life. Sometimes you experience pleasant experiences, sometimes unpleasant ones. Sometimes you experience being a parent or a friend or a worker or an employer or a professional. And sometimes you experience pain, anxiety, suffering, worrying. These are experiences that go through you, but not are you. When you're ready, let go. Turn your attention to where you are in the room. Open your eyes and come back. That was just a little exercise in how we can separate ourselves from the content in our life. Sometimes very vigorous, stimulating content that can sway us in our behavior. Sometimes useful, but sometimes very unuseful and unhealthy behaviors. So I would like us to have a break, and during my break, I always prepare myself some ketones. So I'm going to try and show you this film on hormones if it works. So I'll see you back here after the break, have a discussion. Give me in the comments what that experience is was like for you to have that sense of self and that separation from that content in your life, and what that experience was for you. See you back here in a few moments.
Into the fourth dimension.
I focus a lot on cognition, cognitive health, also women's health and hormones. And I work a lot with menopausal women, peri and postmenopausal women. And so I would say those are probably two really large areas of focus. So hormones in the body pretty much impact every biologic process. So they're going to impact cognition, weight gain, metabolism. So pretty much every system or function in the body is impacted by a hormone. Hormones are sort of chemical messengers. And so if there's an imbalance in a hormone, it's not just an imbalance in one system, it has downstream effects that impacts everything else. I get a lot of questions from my patients about how ketones can impact hormones in their system, and specifically looking at insulin and our insulin resistance, and specifically looking at women who have high testosterone levels. They often have high male sex hormones, so high androgens. And they're also quite insulin resistant. And so insulin resistance means that your body's not responding to insulin. So your body just keeps making more insulin to try and force the response that it's looking for. And what we've found is that beta hydroxybutyrate can actually improve insulin resistance, meaning that your body doesn't have to produce as much insulin. That's a good thing because insulin is a storage hormone. So if you have a lot of insulin, it tells your body store fat right around the middle. So we often see that in women when they're moving into menopause, they naturally become insulin resistant. So all of a sudden they're doing everything they used to do, but they can't lose weight. That's because insulin is spiking and it's telling their body store fat right around the middle. There's something called estrogen dominance. When we have too much estrogen in relation to progesterone, that can actually throw off thyroid function because it causes a chain reaction where you end up binding thyroid hormones. So now your thyroid system is off. So an imbalance in one system will throw off the complete balance of another system. So they're all really interrelated and interconnected. There's a lot of concern that the ketogenic diet, so if somebody, for example, is in adrenal fatigue, that it's not going to be beneficial from a hormone perspective. And we're not finding that that's the case. What we actually have found is that beta hydroxybutyrate can help manage our nervous system. So we have a sympathetic nervous system and we have parasympathetic. And in the sympathetic nervous system, that's our fight and flight mode. And our body, that's what we need to pull an all-nighter, to write an exam the next day, or meet a deadline, something like that. And in that fight and flight state, our body is producing cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And the stress hormone, kind of like insulin, will also cause fat storage around the middle. So that's another thing that we see that we have to address. So when we're in that fight and flight mode, we're producing a lot of that cortisol. And so this is also where we see things like insomnia. So we need to transition from sympathetic to parasympathetic, which is that calm nervous system. And what we have found is that beta hydroxybutyrate can actually help maintain the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic, and actually encourages that parasympathetic or the calm state. And in that calm state, we're not pushing cortisol, our stress hormone, and we're not in that sort of fight or flight state. It calms the nervous system down, will calm the cortisol levels as well.
Okay, welcome back to our Triumph Over Lockdown episode 9. So what we did in the first half was basically deal with the sense of self and how we can relate to that in different ways, and particularly how we can kind of separate ourselves from the content in our life and rather attach ourselves more to the context, to the experiences that we experience daily in our lives, from second to second, from minute to minute, from hour to hour. We have certain experiences. At the moment you're experiencing me talking to you, you're experiencing watching this. on a social platform. And we have these experiences in our own lives. We go about our daily business and having different experiences at different types of the day. And we have different content according to the different domains that we go through in the day. Sometimes we can go through that professional domain, and then we're going into the friendship domain, and then we're going into the neighborly domain, and then we're going into the family sibling domain, and then we're going back into parenting domain, and then we're going into partner domain, and so on. And the more flexible we are with these different contents, the more flexible we are with these different domains, and understand that our life changes as we move through these different domains, and our behavior might change as we move through these different domains, because each of these different domains of our experiences of our life have appropriate behavior, right? And we know this, so we want to be behaving in an appropriate way on the different domains that we are experiencing. But if we are locked into a particular narrative, if we are locked into a particular content, and we want to behave like that in all of the different domains, then we might find that we're going to have ourselves a little bit of a bumpy ride. Some of the behavior might not even be appropriate for that domain. Sorry. So basically, if you've got any comments or anything you want to say, you're welcome to contact me now, and we can discuss it. But in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this session of the Triumph Over Lockdown, that it helps you get through the next day. We'll take each day as it comes, and looking forward to seeing you again the same time tomorrow.
Into the fourth dimension.
Disclaimer, this show is not therapy, nor a replacement for therapy. Should you wish to inquire about therapy, counseling, life, or executive coaching, please contact Dov Benyaacov-Kurtzman at factcpfa@gmail.com. factcpfa@gmail.com. Dov Benyaacov-Kurtzman is a highly experienced psychotherapist, executive business coach, and author of the book, Mind Over Terror. 3 weeks, 2 cities, 1 mission. With over 10,000 hours of experience and academic degrees in government, law, clinical social work, and a postgraduate diploma in psychiatry with distinction, Dov has the background to help you. He's also available for public speaking and corporate training.